It was a bright Saturday afternoon in the small town, where most people like to spend their weekends outdoors. Children ran around the park, families set up picnic blankets, and the sound of laughter carried through the air. In the middle of all this, little Maria, only 6 years old, wandered away from her parents. She was a curious child, always chasing butterflies, picking flowers, or running after things that caught her attention. Nobody thought much of it at first because the park felt safe and everyone knew everyone else. But in just a few moments, the scene changed in a way that made every heart in the park stop beating for a second. Not far from the picnic area, a professional dog trainer named Mr. Harris was busy with his 6 German Shepherds. These were not ordinary dogs. They were big, strong, and trained for rescue and protection work. Their sharp eyes and obedient behavior made them seem like soldiers standing at attention. People often stopped to watch them train, but they usually kept a safe distance. After all, 6 large dogs moving together could look both powerful and intimidating. Maria, however, didn't know the rules of caution that the adults followed. Her tiny steps carried her closer and closer to the training ground. She had spotted a yellow butterfly fluttering just above the grass and wanted to catch it. She giggled as she ran, her little hands reaching into the air, completely unaware of where she was going. Before anyone could stop her, she crossed the invisible line between the park and the training field. At that exact moment, something unexpected happened. The 6 German Shepherds, who had been practicing commands in a perfect row, suddenly broke formation. In a matter of seconds, they sprinted across the field and surrounded Maria. The little girl found herself in the center of a circle made up of large, muscular dogs. Their heads were low, ears raised, and eyes focused directly on her. To an outsider, the scene looked terrifying. The families nearby gasped in horror. Maria's mother dropped the sandwich she was holding and screamed her daughter's name. Her father jumped up, ready to run, but he froze when he saw the way the dogs had positioned themselves. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering prayers under their breath. Everyone thought the same thing, that the dogs might attack, but Maria didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she stood very still, looking around with wide eyes. Her heart pounded fast, but for some reason, she didn't feel the danger that everyone else saw. To her, the dogs didn't look angry. Their tails weren't wagging, but they also weren't growling or baring their teeth. They were silent, still, and strangely calm, as if waiting for something. The trainer, Mr. Harris, immediately realized what had happened and rushed toward the group. His voice carried across the field as he shouted commands, but the dogs didn't move. They stayed in their circle around Maria, their eyes sharp and watchful. It was clear that this was no accident. The dogs had surrounded the child for a reason, but no one yet understood what it was. The silence in the park grew heavy. A few brave men thought about running forward to grab Maria, but fear held them back. What if the sudden movement startled the dogs? What if trying to rescue her made things worse? It felt like time had stopped, with the little girl standing in the middle of 6 towering animals. Maria tilted her head slightly and whispered something so soft that only the closest people could hear. She said, "Doggies." Her innocent voice melted a few hearts even in the middle of the tense moment. It was hard to believe that such a small child could stand without crying while 6 strong dogs surrounded her. Her tiny hands hung at her sides, her curls bouncing in the wind, as she looked from one shepherd to the next as though she was meeting new friends. The people watching held their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Every second felt longer than a minute. The sun, which had been warm and comforting just moments before, now seemed to blaze down on the scene, adding to the weight of the silence. Even the birds that usually filled the park with cheerful songs had gone quiet, as though they too were waiting for the outcome. Maria's parents couldn't move. Her mother's hands trembled, her face pale with fear. Her father clenched his fists, his jaw tight, but his legs refused to take a step forward. They wanted to run to their daughter, to pull her away from the circle of dogs, but something inside them told them to wait, to let the trainer handle the situation. Mr. Harris finally reached the edge of the circle. He was calm, though inside his chest his heart was racing. He knew his dogs better than anyone, and he could see that they weren't aggressive at that moment. Their bodies were tense, yes, but their focus wasn't on the girl. Their eyes were darting slightly beyond her, scanning the ground. He raised his hand and spoke softly, giving a command that usually made them relax. But instead of moving away, the shepherds stood their ground, their eyes fixed as if guarding something. The crowd grew restless. Murmurs spread among the families. Why weren't the dogs obeying? Why were they ignoring their trainer's commands? What could possibly be holding them in that formation around the little girl? Every passing second made the mystery deeper and the tension harder to bear. Maria, still calm, bent down slightly as though curious about what the dogs were looking at. Gasps filled the air again, and her mother nearly fainted from fear. But before Maria could touch the grass, one of the shepherds barked once, sharp and loud, making her straighten up quickly. It was not a threatening bark, it sounded more like a warning. The other dog shifted slightly, closing the circle tighter, as if telling the girl to stay right where she was. By now, half the town had gathered around the park, drawn by the commotion. The once happy weekend gathering had turned into a silent, tense crowd of people staring at a child and 6 dogs. Some were ready to call the police, others suggested animal control, but no one dared to move too fast. Everyone's eyes kept shifting between Maria's tiny figure and the large dogs that towered protectively around her. For Maria, it felt like a strange game. She was not afraid, though she knew something serious was happening. She looked up and saw her parents, tears streaming down their faces, their lips moving but no sound reaching her ears. She raised her little hand as if to wave, but the dogs did not move aside. They stood like statues, forming an unbreakable wall between her and the rest of the world. And in that moment, the entire town realized they were witnessing something unusual, something that would be remembered for years to come. No one could guess what the next moment would bring. Would the trainer finally gain control? Would the dog step aside? Or was there a reason, a hidden reason, why these 6 trained German shepherds had chosen to surround a little girl and keep everyone else away? The answer, though still unseen, was about to shock them all. The people in the park stood frozen, their eyes locked on the strange sight unfolding before them. Maria remained in the middle of the circle, and the 6 German shepherds kept their formation, their bodies firm and alert, their eyes sharp. The crowd was silent, as if the smallest sound might break the fragile balance of the moment. It was a silence filled with fear, curiosity, and confusion, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest and made breathing hard. Maria's parents felt powerless. Her mother gripped her husband's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. But he did not move. He wanted nothing more than to run and snatch his daughter from the middle of that circle. But the sight of the shepherd's unyielding presence stopped him. Something told him that if he rushed forward, it could ruin whatever delicate situation was unfolding. He could only whisper his daughter's name over and over, his voice breaking each time. The other families looked on with wide eyes, unsure if they should step forward to help or stay back to keep the peace. Some children clung to their parents' legs, hiding their faces in fear, while others stared in fascination at the brave little girl standing among the dogs. No one could understand why she wasn't screaming, why she didn't cry or run. She stood there calmly, her small hands hanging loosely at her sides, her curls brushing against her cheeks in the soft wind, her big eyes glancing around as if she trusted the dogs. Mr. Harris, the trainer, kept his eyes on the shepherds. He had trained them for years, and he knew their body language better than anyone else. These dogs were strong and intelligent, built for protection, for rescue missions, and for guarding lives. They never acted without purpose. If they were surrounding the girl like this, there had to be a reason. He tried another command, this time softer, his voice low and steady. The dogs' ears twitched, acknowledging his voice, but their paws stayed rooted to the ground. They were not disobeying him out of stubbornness. They were doing something they believed was right. The tension in the air grew thicker. People exchanged worried glances, their whispers carrying through the silence. "Why aren't they moving?" one woman muttered. "Are they dangerous?" asked a man, his voice trembling. "What if they attack?" The murmurs spread quickly, but no one dared to step closer. Maria shifted her feet slightly, and again, one of the shepherds gave a low bark, not loud enough to scare her, but sharp enough to make her pause. She looked at the dog curiously, tilting her head the way children do when they are puzzled. Instead of fear, her face showed wonder, as though she understood the dogs were communicating with her in their own way. She whispered softly, "It's okay, doggy," her tiny voice carrying through the quiet. A few mothers in the crowd felt tears prick their eyes, amazed at her innocence in such a frightening moment. The shepherds remained calm, yet their focus wasn't entirely on Maria. Their sharp eyes scanned the ground, the grass, and the area around her. Their bodies were slightly angled outward, as though protecting her from something unseen. Mr. Harris noticed this small but crucial detail, and his heart raced. They weren't circling the girl as a threat, they were guarding her. But from what? The crowd held its breath as the trainer slowly stepped closer. Each movement was deliberate, careful so as not to disturb the balance the dogs had created. He stretched his hand out slightly, speaking to them in a calm, soothing tone, using words they knew from years of training. Still, the shepherds stayed unmoving. It was as though they were saying, "Not yet. It's not safe." People's emotions shifted from fear to confusion. Some even began to feel a strange kind of hope. Could it be that the dogs were protecting her rather than threatening her? The idea spread quietly through the whispers of the crowd, but no one was sure enough to believe it fully. Maria's father finally took one step forward, unable to hold back any longer. But before he could take another, one of the shepherds lifted its head, eyes narrowing, and gave a sharp bark. It wasn't aimed at him, it was a warning, a signal. He froze immediately, his chest heaving as his wife pulled him back with shaking hands. The entire crowd gasped. The message was clear: do not cross the line. Despite the fear that filled the air, there was also something remarkable in the way the shepherds behaved. Their movements were controlled, not chaotic. They didn't lunge or snarl. They stood in unity as if they had all silently agreed to one mission: keep the little girl safe no matter the cost. It was a sight that made goosebumps rise on the arms of those watching. These weren't just dogs. They were guardians, disciplined and loyal, bound together by something no human could fully understand. The sun dipped slightly lower, casting longer shadows across the grass, adding an almost surreal glow to the scene. It felt like the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for the hidden truth to reveal itself. The longer the shepherds stood in their circle, the more convinced people became that this was not a scene of danger but of protection. Yet no one knew what danger lay hidden. Maria's eyes wandered to her parents, and she raised her little hand as if to reassure them. Her mother sobbed quietly, clutching her chest, overwhelmed by both fear and relief. How could her child look so calm in the middle of something so terrifying? The German shepherds moved slightly, tightening their circle. Their tails were still, their ears pointed, their muscles tense. Every detail of their posture screamed alertness. The crowd leaned in closer, trying to catch any clue about what the dogs had sensed. And though no one could see it yet, the shepherds were preparing for something that would soon come into view, something that explained everything. The air grew heavy again, filled with suspense. Children clung tighter to their parents, and grown men clenched their fists, feeling powerless. Everyone's eyes stayed fixed on the scene, waiting, watching, wondering. Each passing second stretched longer, the tension pulling at their nerves. Maria blinked and looked down, noticing something in the grass moving slightly. She didn't understand it, but the dogs did. Their bodies stiffened at once, and one of them gave a low growl, not of anger but of warning. The crowd shivered at the sound, their hearts pounding faster. Something was there, hidden in the grass, and the shepherds knew it. But the exact danger, the reason behind their unshakable stance, had not yet been revealed. And as the town stood frozen, they realized they were witnessing a moment that would never be forgotten. A moment where loyalty, instinct, and the bond between animals and humans would prove to be stronger than fear. The answer was coming, and it would shock every single person who stood watching that day. Mr. Harris stood only a few steps away from the circle of German shepherds, his eyes moving carefully between each one of them. He had trained these dogs for years, and he knew them like his own family. They had never acted without reason, never disobeyed his commands without cause. The way they stood now, firm, focused, united, told him that something was happening, something beyond what the human eye could see at first glance. The crowd around the park had grown larger. Word had spread quickly that a little girl was surrounded by 6 trained dogs, and people rushed from nearby streets to see what was happening. Mothers held their children close. Fathers stood tense with folded arms, and elderly neighbors leaned on walking sticks, whispering prayers under their breath. The scene had turned the cheerful park into a stage of suspense, where every small movement drew gasps from the onlookers. Maria, the little girl, remained in the center, her tiny body looking even smaller compared to the powerful animals around her. She wasn't crying and she wasn't trembling. She looked curious, tilting her head slightly as if she could sense that the dogs were not her enemies. Her calmness gave the crowd some relief, but it also puzzled them. How could a child remain so composed when adults themselves were frozen in fear? Mr. Harris slowly raised his hand, his palm open, and gave a command in a low, steady voice. It was the same command he used when he wanted the shepherds to stand down. Their ears flicked at the sound, their bodies acknowledging his presence, but they did not move. Their paws pressed into the grass, their eyes sharp, their posture unchanged. They had decided to stay where they were, and that decision was stronger than any command. The trainer's mind raced. He had taught them obedience, but he had also taught them to trust their instincts when they sensed danger. These dogs were not just protectors, they were thinkers. They could smell, hear, and sense things humans often overlooked. If they had chosen to ignore his words, it meant they believed something important was happening. He crouched slightly, bringing himself lower to the ground, trying to see what they were protecting the girl from. The crowd leaned forward too, as though hoping to catch a glimpse of the hidden truth. The grass swayed gently in the wind, but nothing unusual caught the human eye. Yet the dog's eyes remained fixed, their muscles tense, their breathing steady. "Stay calm," Mr. Harris said softly, not just to the dogs, but to everyone watching. His voice carried across the silence, giving the crowd a fragile thread of comfort. "They are not hurting her. They are guarding her." Gasps filled the air. People exchanged quick glances, their fear shifting into confusion. Guarding her from what? The question hung in the air, heavier than before. Maria blinked her wide eyes at the trainer and asked in her small, innocent voice, "Mister, why the doggies here?" The simple question from her lips made several people wipe their eyes. Even in the middle of such tension, her words sounded soft like a bell cutting through the heavy silence. Mr. Harris smiled gently, though his heart was pounding. "They're keeping you safe, sweetheart," he said, his tone steady, hoping she could believe him. She nodded as though she understood, her little face full of trust. The shepherds shifted slightly, their circle tightening around Maria. Their tails were still, their ears raised, their eyes sharp. One of them let out a low, controlled growl, not a sound of anger, but a signal. The trainer recognized it instantly. It was the growl of warning, the sound they made when danger was close but not yet in sight. The crowd murmured in growing unease. Some people stepped back instinctively, while others leaned forward trying to see. The tension was like a string pulled tighter and tighter, ready to snap. Maria's father could no longer hold his silence. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Please, bring my daughter back." His words echoed across the park, trembling with desperation. Maria looked at him with wide eyes, and for the first time her lips quivered. She raised her hand toward him, but the shepherds did not break their formation. Mr. Harris turned his head quickly, his eyes stern. "Don't rush forward," he warned, his voice firm. "Trust them. They are doing something important." The father's fists clenched, but he nodded reluctantly, tears streaming down his face. He wanted to trust, but the sight of his little girl trapped in a circle of dogs was tearing his heart apart. The trainer stepped closer, inch by inch, his hands raised gently to show calmness. His voice lowered almost like a lullaby as he spoke to the shepherds. "Good boys. Good girls. Stay strong." The dogs' ears twitched at his words, acknowledging him, but their eyes remained fixed on the ground. Then something shifted in the air. One of the shepherds barked once, loud and commanding, the kind of bark that jolted every person in the crowd. Another shepherd pawed at the ground near Maria's feet, digging slightly at the grass. The trainer's eyes narrowed as he followed their signals, his mind piecing together the truth. He bent lower, squinting at the grass. At first he saw only the blade swaying, but then a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something thin and dark slithered just beneath the surface of the grass, its body curving like a shadow. His heart skipped a beat. Now he understood. The dogs weren't circling Maria out of confusion. They weren't ignoring his commands out of stubbornness. They were shielding her from a hidden danger that no human had noticed yet. The crowd gasped as the trainer straightened, his face pale but calm. "Stay back," he shouted firmly, raising his hand toward the onlookers. "Do not move." His words rang with urgency, and everyone froze instantly, their breaths held in suspense. Maria looked up at him, her innocent eyes searching his face. "What is it, mister?" she asked softly, her voice trembling just slightly for the first time. He gave her the gentlest smile he could manage, though his heart raced. "It's all right, little one," he said. "The dogs are here for you." The shepherds tightened their circle once again, their bodies tense as they stood between Maria and the danger that lurked just beneath the grass. The crowd held its breath, waiting, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding. Something was about to happen, something that would finally reveal why the 6 trained German shepherds had acted with such urgency. The trainer knew that the next few moments would determine everything. The town was about to witness not only the truth but also the bravery and loyalty of 6 dogs, whose instincts were stronger than human fear. And as the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sound of a child's soft breathing and the steady stance of 6 guardians, the hidden danger slowly began to reveal itself. The air in the park grew heavier with every passing second. The 6 German shepherds stood like statues, their bodies tense, their eyes sharp, their circle unbroken around little Maria. The crowd could feel that something was there, something they could not see yet, but the dogs sensed it clearly. Their instincts were louder than any command, stronger than any human voice. Maria looked down at the grass beneath her shoes, her little fingers curling nervously at her sides. For the first time, she felt the seriousness of the moment. She didn't cry, but her wide eyes blinked quickly, showing she was trying to be brave. The shepherds seemed to notice her unease. One of them stepped slightly closer, brushing against her leg, as though to remind her she was not alone. Mr. Harris, the trainer, lowered himself closer to the ground. His eyes scanned the grass, his ears tuned to every sound. Then it happened again. A flicker of movement, quick and smooth, sliding across the blades of grass. His stomach tightened. He knew instantly what it was. His years of working outdoors had trained his eyes to catch such movements. It was no ordinary shadow. He looked up at the crowd, his voice steady but urgent. "Everyone stay calm. Do not move." His words carried across the silence, sharp and commanding. The parents, the children, the neighbors, all froze, their hearts pounding faster. Nobody dared to step forward now. Then the truth revealed itself. A long, dark snake slithered out from the grass, its body curling and twisting, moving with silent menace toward where Maria stood. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Fathers stepped back in shock, and Maria's mother let out a choked cry. The danger they had all feared was finally visible. The shepherds had seen it long before the humans had. That was why they had broken their training, why they had circled the little girl and refused to move. They weren't disobeying, they were protecting. The snake lifted its head slightly, its tongue flicking in and out as it tested the air. It was too close to Maria, far too close for comfort. The sight made the whole town's breath catch in their throats. But the dogs didn't flinch. They stood their ground, their eyes locked on the reptile, their bodies shielding the girl completely. Maria whimpered softly, not because she understood the danger, but because she could feel the tension in the air. Her small hand reached out and rested gently on the back of the shepherd closest to her. The dog didn't move, but its steady stance gave her comfort. She could feel the warmth of its body, the strength in its muscles. Even at her age, she seemed to understand that the dogs were her protectors. The snake moved closer, its body brushing against the grass with a sound that only the dogs seemed to hear clearly. One of the shepherds let out a sharp bark, making the snake pause for a second. The sound echoed through the park, sending shivers down everyone's spines. Another shepherd growled low, a deep rumble that made the ground seem to vibrate. The crowd watched in awe as the dogs acted in perfect coordination, without fear, without hesitation. Mr. Harris knew he had to act quickly, but he also knew he had to trust his dogs. They had been trained for moments like this, trained to protect life at all costs. He crouched lower, his hand reaching slowly into his training bag where he carried tools for emergencies. His movements were careful, controlled so as not to startle the snake. The tension was unbearable. Children clung tighter to their parents, some crying quietly. Adults held their breath, their eyes fixed on the circle of dogs and the deadly threat inside it. Every second felt like an eternity. The snake inched forward again, but the shepherds tightened their circle, lowering their heads, their teeth barely visible, their growls rising in unison. It was as though they had become one single force, a wall of loyalty and courage standing between a child and danger. The crowd was stunned. They had never seen animals behave with such discipline, such unity. Then, with a sudden flick, the snake darted closer, its body curving swiftly across the grass. The crowd gasped, but before the snake could reach Maria, one of the shepherds lunged forward with lightning speed. Its body moved with precision, its jaws snapping just inches away from the reptile. The snake recoiled instantly, retreating back a few feet. The dog returned to its position, calm and controlled, as if it had simply drawn a line the snake was not allowed to cross. The park erupted in whispers. People were astonished, their fear now mixed with admiration. These dogs weren't just trained, they were heroes. Maria, still in the middle, whispered again, her voice tiny but clear. "Good doggy," she said, patting the nearest shepherd on its back. The simplicity of her words, her trust in her protectors, made the crowd's hearts swell with emotion. Mr. Harris finally pulled out a long stick from his bag, a tool he sometimes used during field training. He stepped closer, careful not to disrupt the circle. His eyes never left the snake, which still lingered, its head swaying slightly, testing whether it should strike again. The shepherds growled louder, warning it back. With one firm move, the trainer used the stick to push at the ground near the snake, guiding it away from the circle. The snake hissed, its body curling in protest, but it began to slither backward, away from the girl and the dogs. The shepherds remained firm, moving in unison with the trainer, their eyes never leaving the threat. The crowd leaned forward, their hands clasped tightly, their hearts pounding. Every person prayed silently that the danger would pass quickly. The snake moved further, finally retreating into the tall grass at the far end of the field. The shepherds held their positions until the very last inch of its body disappeared from sight. Only then did they begin to relax. One by one they straightened, their growls fading, their tails lowering. The tension in their bodies eased, but they did not leave Maria's side. They had completed their duty, but they were not ready to abandon her just yet. The park erupted in applause and cheers, the sound breaking through the heavy silence that had hung over them. Parents hugged their children tightly, neighbors clapped, and some even wept openly. The fear that had gripped them moments before was replaced with pure relief and gratitude. Maria's parents rushed forward, their legs finally free to move. Her mother fell to her knees, scooping her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Her father held them both, his chest heaving with sobs. Maria giggled softly, patting her mother's cheek, as though trying to comfort her instead. The shepherds stepped back slightly, but they stayed close, their eyes still alert, making sure the danger was truly gone. Mr. Harris walked forward, placing a gentle hand on one of their heads, his voice full of pride. "Good job, boys. Good job, girls. You did exactly what you were trained to do." The crowd continued to cheer, their voices carrying across the park. Strangers hugged one another, their fear turned into joy. People who had once been nervous around the shepherds now looked at them with admiration and respect. They weren't just big dogs, they were guardians, protectors, heroes. And though the danger had passed, the image of 6 loyal dogs surrounding a tiny girl would remain in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. It was a moment that taught them all a lesson about trust, loyalty, and the bond between humans and animals. The town would never forget the day when 6 German shepherds saved a child's life by standing as her living shield. The moment the snake finally slithered out of sight, a wave of relief washed over everyone in the park. People who had been frozen with fear slowly began to breathe again. Mothers clutched their children, whispering comforting words. Fathers rubbed their foreheads, some shaking with the stress they hadn't realized they were holding. The tension that had gripped the entire town for what felt like hours now slowly melted into awe and admiration. Maria's mother held her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't stop thanking God, repeating over and over how lucky they were. Maria, sensing her mother's relief, giggled softly and patted her hand as though telling her not to cry. Her tiny innocence and bravery shone through the chaos that had just unfolded. Her father crouched beside them, wrapping his arms around both of them, trying to steady himself. His chest heaved as he whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for keeping her safe." The 6 German shepherds stayed close, their bodies still alert even though the danger had passed. They moved in a slow, deliberate manner, walking around Maria and her parents, their eyes scanning the area to make sure no threat remained. The townspeople watched in amazement. These dogs, once seen as intimidating because of their size and power, had just saved a child's life. Their bravery and loyalty left the crowd speechless. Mr. Harris approached the family cautiously, keeping his hand on one of the dogs to calm it down. "They did exactly what they were trained to do," he said softly. "They sensed the danger before anyone else did. They didn't act aggressively, they acted to protect, and they succeeded." People in the crowd began murmuring in agreement. Their fear had transformed into respect and admiration. The town had always known that the German shepherds were well trained, but no one had ever seen them in action like this. They had been witnesses to something extraordinary, something that went beyond training or obedience. These dogs had instincts, courage, and a devotion that few humans could match. Neighbors rushed forward cautiously, clapping their hands and cheering. Some children ran to Maria, asking questions in excited whispers. "Were you scared?" one asked. "How did the dogs know?" Maria smiled shyly and shrugged, her young mind still processing what had happened. "They helped me," she said simply. The words were plain, but they carried the weight of a profound truth. The dogs had truly been her protectors. Maria's parents thanked Mr. Harris over and over, their voices thick with emotion. "We don't know how to repay you," her mother said, holding his hands tightly. Mr. Harris smiled, shaking his head. "You don't need to. You already did by trusting them and staying calm. The dogs did the rest." The crowd continued to linger, their eyes following the dogs and the trainer. Even as the initial fear faded, the story had made an impression that would last a lifetime. People began talking quietly among themselves, recounting the details of what they had seen. Some were amazed by the dog's speed, others by their precision, and many were simply moved by the loyalty and devotion displayed. Local news crews, who had heard of the event, arrived soon after. Reporters spoke to Maria's parents and to Mr. Harris, capturing the dramatic story for the wider community. Photographs were taken, videos recorded, and soon the story spread throughout the town, then to neighboring towns and eventually even farther. It became a tale of heroism, one that people would retell for years to come. In the following days, the shepherds became minor celebrities in the town. Children wanted to pet them, adults wanted to shake their paws in gratitude, and the dogs were happy to accept the attention, though they remained disciplined and calm. Maria visited them often, running to the field to play, her laughter filling the air. The bond between her and the dogs grew stronger each day. She trusted them completely, and the dogs in turn were protective without needing commands. The town held a small ceremony to honor the dogs. Families brought flowers and children drew pictures of the brave animals. Mr. Harris spoke to everyone, explaining how training, instincts, and care had combined to save a life. People clapped, cheered, and some even cried tears of joy. It was a moment of celebration, but also a moment of reflection. The town realized how fortunate they were to have such loyal animals in their community. Maria's parents, still amazed by what had happened, often looked at their daughter and the dogs with a sense of gratitude they could hardly put into words. They knew that one day Maria would understand the true gravity of the moment, that she had been protected by creatures who acted purely out of loyalty and instinct. But even now, in her young mind, she had learned a lesson about trust, bravery, and the importance of staying calm in difficult situations. The event also brought the town closer together. Neighbors who had never spoken before shared their relief and amazement. Parents exchanged stories of their children. Teachers spoke of the courage they had witnessed, and local businesses displayed pictures of the heroic dogs in their windows. It became a story that united everyone, a reminder of how quickly fear could turn into hope when courage and loyalty were present. In the weeks that followed, the 6 German shepherds continued their training, but now they were treated like heroes. Children waved to them as they passed by, and adults often stopped to admire their calm, noble demeanor. Maria, of course, remained close to them, often sitting among them during training, safe and protected, always smiling. The bond she shared with these animals was unbreakable. Even years later, the story remained alive in the town's memory. People still talked about the day a little girl had been surrounded by 6 German shepherds and saved from danger. They spoke of the dog's bravery, their loyalty, and the instinct that had allowed them to protect a life without hesitation. And for Maria, the memory became part of who she was, a reminder that even in moments of fear, there could be guardians watching over her, ready to act with courage and devotion. The event became a lesson for everyone in the town, that loyalty and courage could be found in places and beings that were often underestimated, that instincts and training could combine to perform miracles, and that a calm heart in a moment of fear could make all the difference. It was a story that inspired hope, kindness, and admiration, and it became a legacy for the town that would last for generations. And so, life gradually returned to normal in the park. Children played, families picnicked, and the laughter and chatter returned. Yet in the hearts of the townspeople, there remained a quiet respect for the 6 German shepherds who had, in one moment, proven themselves to be more than pets. They were heroes, guardians, and friends who had risked everything to protect a little girl. Maria grew up with the story as part of her identity, always remembering the 6 dogs who had surrounded her not to harm, but to shield her from danger. She learned from them about bravery, trust, and the silent power of loyalty. And though she would face many challenges in life, she never forgot that day in the park, when 6 German shepherds had surrounded her, and in doing so had captured the hearts of an entire town.